Chapter 17, Primary Challenge Math. Let's zoom in on the first problem. And so once again, we have that theme of trying to use ratios. Let's try and use a ratio for this one. So we want to know speed in miles per hour. So think about this. What do you want to have on top? So we want to have on top our distance and down below the time. Okay, so let's set it up that way. So we're going to have 1 mile in 5 seconds is going to be how much in 1 hour? What we want to think about is, well, 1 hour is what? It's 60 minutes times 60 seconds. So altogether it's 3,600 seconds. So if we can figure out, well, how many 5-second chunks do we have in 3,600, that'll tell us how many miles we have. Well, how can we do that? Well, that's a division problem. So we say the 3,600 seconds is divided up into how many 5-second chunks, because each 5-second chunk we go a mile. So we say, okay, well, if we have 3,600s, we can share out 35 of them. We have 100 left. Be 20. So there'll be 720 chunks of 5 seconds, so we'll be able to go 720 miles. So in the number 2, the important thing is to understand how you would calculate, not necessarily doing the calculation. So we'd say if we are 186,000 miles in a second, how much do we do in 1 hour? And again, we think about that, well, there's 3,600 seconds in an hour, so we're going to multiply 186,000 times 3,600. Now, for those of you who like to think about scientific notation, you can see how much easier it is to get an approximate answer. So let's change this into scientific notation. So that would be 1.86 times what? Well, 100,000s are 10 to the 5th. Okay, and we're going to multiply that by 3.6 times, well, thousands are 10 to the 3rd. So we have thousands times 100,000s. And so if we look at this, we say, well, this actually isn't so bad. 1.8, not quite 2, so it might be around 7 if we multiply that. Around 7, and then multiplying by 10 5 times, multiplying by 10 3 more times is like multiplying by 10 8 times. 10 to the 8th is going to be our approximate answer. Okay? So 10 to the 6th is millions, 10 to the 7th, 10 millions, 10 to the 8th, 100 million. So around approximately equal to 700 million miles. So a long way in an hour. Now, does that answer make sense? Let's think about that. Does it make sense? Well, the sun is 93 million miles away, and it takes around 8.5 minutes. So we say, well, about 7 times more than that. Yeah, so our answer, we see, makes sense. So let's try the ratio strategy again here. And once again, let's think of that idea of we're going to put the distance over the time. So if we have 1 mile in 1 minute, what will we have in 1 hour? Well, 1 hour is 60 minutes, so this relationship is a times 60 relationship. So we're just going to multiply on the top times 60, and that will mean that we're going a mile a minute is 60 miles per hour. This problem was a little bit difficult for people, and so we'll draw it out in a couple of different ways to see it. So if you were thinking about it from a Singapore model drawing perspective, you'd say in an hour and a half, so you say, okay, I'll draw out 2 boxes, but the second one I'll X out the half. And so here we are, and in an hour and a half, I can go 27,000. Well, it's not so easy to divide it up if you think of a whole and a half, But you could also think of this as being 3 halves. So 1 half, 2 halves, 3 halves. So if you think of an hour and a half as 3 halves, you say, okay, well each half hour, how much are we going to do of this 27,000? So if I divide the 27,000 into 3 parts, I get 9,000 in each part. But we're sort of obsessed with how much do we do in an hour, and that's just the first 2 parts, and that would just be 9,000 plus 9,000 equals 18,000. Now, of course, there's a way to do this. Let's look at the ratio way to do it, and we'd say, I do 27,000 in an hour and a half in 3 halves. How much do I do in 2 halves? Okay, so you can look at it that way. You can say, oh, well, I need to divide by 3 halves, and that would be another way to do it. So I could say 27,000 divided by 3 halves is the same as 27,000 times 2/3, which is basically what we did in that diagram, equals 18,000. So here again, let's try and use that ratio idea, and we'll do the same thing, the idea of we want to have distance over time, and we'll eventually get down to our unit rate of how much per hour. So we have 1 mile in 8 minutes. So then we want to know, well, how many miles would it go in an hour? And an hour is 60 minutes. And so when you look at it, you say, well, 8 times 7 is 56, and 8 times 8 equals 64. And 60 is exactly halfway in between. Thinking, well, it's between 7 and 8, halfway in between, it's times 7.5, times 7.5. So if we take that mile an hour and go times 7, that mile, and say times 7.5, we get our answer. It's 7.5 miles per hour.